By the end of February 1862, Major General Halleck commanded all the armies in the Valley of the Mississippi, from his headquarters in St. Louis. These were the Army of the Ohio, Major General Buell, in Kentucky; the Army of the Tennessee, Major General Grant, at Forts Henry and Donelson; the Army of the Mississippi, Major General Pope, and that of General S.R. Curtis, in southwest Missouri. He posted his chief of staff, General Cullom, at Cairo, and me, at Paducah, chiefly to expedite and facilitate the important operations then in progress up the Tennessee and Cumberland rivers. Fort Donelson had surrendered to General Grant on the 16th of February, and there must have been a good deal of confusion resulting from the necessary care of the wounded and disposition of prisoners, common to all such occasions, and there was a real difficulty in communicating between St. Louis and Fort Donelson. General Buell had also followed up the rebel army, which had retreated hastily from Bowling Green to and through Nashville, a city of so much importance to the South that it was at one time proposed as its capital. Both Generals Grant and Buell looked to its capture as an event of great importance. On the 21st, General Grant sent General Smith with his division to Clarksville, 50 miles above Donelson, toward Nashville, and on the 27th went himself to Nashville to meet and confer with General Buell, but returned to Donelson the next day. Meantime, General Halleck at St. Louis must have felt that his armies were getting away from him, and began to send dispatches to me at Paducah to be forwarded by boat or by a rickety telegraph line up to Fort Henry, which lay entirely in a hostile country, and was consequently always out of repair. On the 1st of March, I received the following dispatch, and forwarded it to General Grant, both by the telegraph and boat. To General Grant, Fort Henry transports will be sent you as soon as possible, to move your column up the Tennessee River. The main object of this expedition will be to destroy the railroad bridge over Bear Creek near Eastport, Mississippi, and also the railroad connections at Corinth, Jackson, and Humboldt. It is thought best that these objects be attempted in the order named. Strong detachments of cavalry and light artillery, supported by infantry, may, by rapid movements, reach these points from the river, without any serious opposition. Avoid any general engagements with strong forces. It will be better to retreat than to risk a general battle. This should be strongly impressed on the officers sent with expeditions from the river. General C.F. Smith or some very discreet officer should be selected for such commands. Having accomplished these objects, or such of them as may be practicable, you will return to Danville and move on Paris. Perhaps the troops sent to Jackson and Humboldt can reach Paris by land as easily as to return to the transports. This must depend on the character of the roads and the position of the enemy. All telegraphic lines which can be reached must be cut. The gunboats will accompany the transports for their protection. Any loyal Tennesseans who desire it may be enlisted and supplied with arms. Competent officers should be left to command Forts Henry and Donelson in your absence. I have indicated in general terms the object of this. H. W. Halleck, Major General. Again on the 2d, Cairo, March 1, 1862, to General Grant. General Halleck, February 25th, telegraphs me. General Grant will send no more forces to Clarksville. General Smith's division will come to Fort Henry, or a point higher up on the Tennessee River. Transports will also be collected at Paducah. 2 gunboats in Tennessee River with Grant. General Grant will immediately have small garrisons detailed for Forts Henry and Donelson, and all other forces made ready for the field. From your letter of the 28th, I learn you were at Fort Donelson, and General Smith at Nashville, from which I infer you could not have received orders. Halleck's telegram of last night says, "Who sent Smith's division to Nashville? I ordered it across to the Tennessee, where they are wanted immediately. Order them back. Send all spare transports up Tennessee to General Grant." Evidently the general supposes you to be on the Tennessee. I am sending all the transports I can find for you, reporting to General Sherman for orders to go up the Cumberland for you, or, if you march across to Fort Henry, then to send them up the Tennessee. G. W. Cullom, Brigadier General. On the 4th came this dispatch. To Major General U.S. Grant, you will place Major General C.F. Smith in command of expedition, and remain yourself at Fort Henry. Why do you not obey my orders to report strength and positions of your command? H. W. Halleck. Major General Halleck was evidently working himself into a passion, but he was too far from the seat of war to make due allowance for the actual state of facts. General Grant had done so much that General Halleck should have been patient. Meantime at Paducah, I was busy sending boats in every direction. Some under the orders of General Halleck, others of General Cullom, others for General Grant, and still others for General Buell at Nashville. And at the same time, I was organizing out of the new troops that were arriving at Paducah a division for myself when allowed to take the field, which I had been promised by General Halleck. His purpose was evidently to operate up the Tennessee River, to break up Bear Creek Bridge and the railroad communications between the Mississippi and Tennessee rivers, and no doubt he was provoked that Generals Grant and Smith had turned aside to Nashville. In the meantime, several of the gunboats, under Captain Phelps, United States Navy, had gone up the Tennessee as far as Florence, and on their return had reported a strong Union feeling among the people along the river. On the 10th of March, having received the necessary orders from General Halleck, I embarked my division at Paducah. It was composed of 4 brigades. The 1st, commanded by Colonel S. G. Hicks, was composed of the 40th Illinois, 46th Ohio, and Morton's Indiana Battery on the boats Sally List, Golden Gate, J. B. Adams, and Lancaster. The 2nd Brigade, Colonel D. Stewart, was composed of the 55th Illinois, 71st Ohio, and 54th Ohio, embarked on the Hannibal, Universe, Hazeldell, Cheeseman, and Prairie Rose. The 3rd Brigade, Colonel Hildebrand, was composed of the 77th Ohio, 53rd Ohio, embarked on the Poland, Anglo-Saxon, Ohio No. 3, and Continental. 4th Brigade, Colonel Buckland, was composed of the 72nd Ohio, 48th Ohio, and 70th Ohio, embarked on the Empress, Baltic, Shenango, and Marengo. We steamed up to Fort Henry, the river being high and in splendid order. There I reported in person to General C. F. Smith, and by him was ordered a few miles above, to the remains of the burned railroad bridge, to await the rendezvous of the rest of his army. I had my headquarters on the Continental. Among my colonels I had a strange character, Thomas Worthington, colonel of the 46th Ohio. He was a graduate of West Point, of the class of 1827, was therefore older than General Halleck, General Grant, or myself, and claimed to know more of war than all of us put together. In ascending the river, he did not keep his place in the column, but pushed on, and reached Savannah, a day before the rest of my division. When I reached that place, I found that Worthington had landed his regiment, and was flying about giving orders, as though he were commander-in-chief. I made him get back to his boat, and gave him to understand that he must thereafter keep his place. General C. F. Smith arrived about the 13th of March, with a large fleet of boats containing Hurlbut's division, Lew, Wallace's division, and that of himself, then commanded by Brigadier General W. H. L. Wallace. General Smith sent for me to meet him on his boat, and ordered me to push on under escort of the 2 gunboats, Lexington and Tyler, commanded by Captains Gwynn and Shirk, United States Navy. I was to land at some point below Eastport, and make a break of the Memphis and Charleston Railroad, between Tuscumbia and Corinth. General Smith was quite unwell, and was suffering from his leg, which was swollen and very sore, from a mere abrasion in stepping into a small boat. This actually mortified and resulted in his death about a month after, viz., April 25, 1862. He was adjutant of the military academy during the early part of my career there, and afterward commandant of cadets. He was a very handsome and soldierly man, of great experience, and at Donelson had acted with so much personal bravery that to him many attributed the success of the assault. I immediately steamed up the Tennessee River, following the 2 gunboats, and in passing Pittsburgh Landing, was told by Captain Gwynn that on his former trip up the river, he had found a rebel regiment of cavalry posted there, and that it was the usual landing place for the people about Corinth, distant 30 miles. I sent word back to General Smith that, if we were detained up the river, he ought to post some troops at Pittsburgh Landing. We went on up the river cautiously, till we saw Eastport and Chickasaw, both of which were occupied by rebel batteries, and a small rebel force of infantry. We then dropped back quietly to the mouth of Yellow River, a few miles below, whence led a road to Burnsville, a place on the Memphis and Charleston road, where were the company's repair shops. We at once commenced disembarking the command, first the cavalry, which started at once for Burnsville, with orders to tear up the railroad track, and burn the depots, shops, etc., and I followed with the infantry and artillery, as fast as they were disembarked. It was raining very hard at the time. Daylight found us about 6 miles out, where we met the cavalry returning. They had made numerous attempts to cross the streams, which had become so swollen that mere brooks covered the whole bottom. And my aide-de-camp, Sanger, whom I had dispatched with the cavalry, reported the loss, by drowning, of several of the men. The rain was pouring in torrents, and reports from the rear came that the river was rising very fast, and that, unless we got back to our boats soon, the bottom would be simply impassable. There was no alternative but to regain our boats, and even this was so difficult that we had to unharness the artillery horses and drag the guns under water through the bayous to reach the bank of the river. Once more embarked, I concluded to drop down to Pittsburgh Landing, and to make the attempt from there. During the night of the 14th, we dropped down to Pittsburgh Landing, where I found Hurlbut's division in boats. Leaving my command there, I steamed down to Savannah and reported to General Smith in person, who saw in the flooded Tennessee the full truth of my report, and he then instructed me to disembark my own division, and that of General Hurlbut at Pittsburgh Landing, to take positions well back, and to leave room for his whole army, telling me that he would soon come up in person and move out in force to make the lodgment on the railroad, contemplated by General Halleck's orders. Lieutenant Colonel McPherson, of General C.F. Smith's, or rather General Halleck's staff, returned with me, and on the 16th of March we disembarked and marched out about 10 miles toward Corinth, to a place called Monterey or Pea Ridge, where the rebels had a cavalry regiment, which of course decamped on our approach. But from the people we learned that trains were bringing large masses of men from every direction into Corinth. McPherson and I reconnoitered the ground well, and then returned to our boats. On the 18th, Hurlbut disembarked his division and took post about 1.5 miles out, near where the roads branched, one leading to Corinth and the other toward Hamburg. On the 19th, I disembarked my division and took post about 3 miles back, 3 of the brigades covering the roads to Purdy and Corinth, and the other brigade stewards temporarily at a place on the Hamburg Road near Lick Creek Ford, where the Bark Road came into the Hamburg Road. Within a few days, Prentice's division arrived and camped on my left, and afterward McClernand's and W.H.L. Wallace's divisions, which formed a line to our rear. Lew Wallace's division remained on the north side of Snake Creek, on a road leading from Savannah or Krantz Landing to Purdy. General C.F. Smith remained back at Savannah, in chief command, and I was only responsible for my own division. I kept pickets well out on the roads and made myself familiar with all the ground inside and outside my lines. My personal staff was composed of Captain J.H. Hammond, Assistant Adjutant General, Surgeons Hartshorn and LeMayu, Lieutenant Colonels Haskell and Sanger, Inspector Generals, Lieutenants McCoy and John Taylor, aides-de-camp. We were all conscious that the enemy was collecting at Corinth, but in what force we could not know, nor did we know what was going on behind us. On the 17th of March, General U.S. Grant was restored to the command of all the troops up the Tennessee River, by reason of General Smith's extreme illness, and because he had explained to General Halleck satisfactorily his conduct after Donelson, and he too made his headquarters at Savannah, but frequently visited our camps. I always acted on the supposition that we were an invading army, that our purpose was to move forward in force, make a lodgment on the Memphis and Charleston road, and thus repeat the grand tactics of Fort Donelson, by separating the rebels in the interior from those at Memphis and on the Mississippi River. We did not fortify our camps against an attack, because we had no orders to do so, and because such a course would have made our raw men timid. The position was naturally strong, with Snake Creek on our right, a deep, bold stream, with a confluent Owl Creek to our right front, and Lick Creek, with a similar confluent, on our left, thus narrowing the space over which we could be attacked to about 1.5 miles or 2 miles. At a later period of the war, we could have rendered this position impregnable in one night, but at this time we did not do it, and it may be it is well we did not. From about the 1st of April, we were conscious that the rebel cavalry in our front was getting bolder and more saucy, and on Friday, the 4th of April, it dashed down and carried off one of our picket guards, composed of an officer and 7 men, posted a couple of miles out on the Corinth road. Colonel Buckland sent a company to its relief, then followed himself with a regiment, and fearing lest he might be worsted, I called out his whole brigade, and followed some 4 or 5 miles, but the cavalry in advance encountered artillery. I then, after dark, drew back to our lines, and reported the fact by letter to General Grant, at Savannah. But thus far we had not positively detected the presence of infantry, for cavalry regiments generally had a couple of guns along, and I suppose the guns that opened on the evening of Friday, April 4th, belonged to the cavalry that was hovering along our whole front. Saturday passed in our camps without any unusual event, the weather being wet and mild, and the roads back to the steamboat landing being heavy with mud. But on Sunday morning, the 6th, early, there was a good deal of picket firing, and I got breakfast, rode out along my lines, and about 400 yards to the front of Appler's regiment, received from some bushes in a ravine to the left front, a volley which killed my orderly Holiday. About the same time I saw the rebel lines of battle in front, coming down on us as far as the eye could reach. All my troops were in line of battle ready, and the ground was favorable to us. I gave the necessary orders to the battery waterhouses attached to Hildebrand's brigade, and cautioned the men to reserve their fire till the rebels had crossed the ravine of Owl Creek, and had begun the ascent. Also, sent staff officers to notify Generals McClernand and Prentiss of the coming blow. Indeed, McClernand had already sent 3 regiments to the support of my left flank, and they were in position when the onset came. In a few minutes, the Battle of Shiloh began with extreme fury, and lasted 2 days. Its history has been well given, and it has been made the subject of a great deal of controversy. Hildebrand's brigade was soon knocked to pieces, but Buckland's and McDowell's kept their organization throughout. Stuart's was driven back to the river, and did not join me in person till the 2nd day of the battle. I think my several reports of that battle are condensed and good, made on the spot, when all the names and facts were fresh in my memory, and are herewith given entire. Headquarters 1st Division, Pittsburgh Landing, March 17, 1862. Captain Wum, McKeichel, Assistant Adjutant General to General C.F. Smith, Savannah, Tennessee. Last night I dispatched a party of cavalry, at 6 p.m., under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Heath, 5th Ohio Cavalry, for a strong reconnaissance, if possible, to be converted into an attack upon the Memphis road. The command got off punctually, followed at 12 o'clock at night by the 1st Brigade of my division, commanded by Colonel McDowell, the other brigades to follow in order. About 1 at night the cavalry returned, reporting the road occupied in force by the enemy, with whose advance guard they skirmished, driving them back about a mile, taking 2 prisoners, and having their chief guide, Thomas Maxwell, Esquire, and 3 men of the 4th Illinois, wounded. Enclosed. Please find the report of Lieutenant Colonel Heath, also a copy of his instructions, and the order of march. As soon as the cavalry returned, I saw that an attempt on the road was frustrated, and accordingly have placed McDowell's brigade to our right front, guarding the pass of Snake Creek, Stuart's brigade to the left front, to watch the pass of Lick Creek, and I shall this morning move directly out on the Corinth Road, about 8 miles to or toward Pea Ridge, which is a key point to the southwest. General Hurlbut's division will be landed today, and the artillery and infantry disposed so as to defend Pittsburgh, leading my division entire for any movement by land or water. As near as I can learn, there are 5 regiments of rebel infantry at Purdy. At Corinth, and distributed along the railroad to Inca, are probably 30,000 men, but my information from prisoners is very indistinct. Every road and path is occupied by the enemy's cavalry, whose orders seem to be to fire a volley, retire again, fire, and retire. The force on the Purdy Road, attacked and driven by Major Bowman yesterday, was about 60 strong. That encountered last night on the Corinth Road was about 5 companies of Tennessee cavalry, sent from Purdy, about 2 p.m. yesterday. I hear there is a force of 2 regiments on Pea Ridge, at the point where the Purdy and Corinth roads come together. I am satisfied we cannot reach the Memphis and Charleston road without a considerable engagement, which is prohibited by General Halleck's instructions, so that I will be governed by your orders of yesterday, to occupy Pittsburgh strongly, extend the pickets so as to include a semicircle of 3 miles, and push a strong reconnaissance as far out as Lick Creek and Pea Ridge. I will send down a good many boats today to be employed as you may direct, and would be obliged if you would send a couple of 1,000 sacks of corn, as much hay as you can possibly spare, and if possible, a barge of coal. I will send a steamboat under care of the gunboat to collect corn from cribs on the river bank. I have the honor to be your obedient servant, W. T. Sherman, Brigadier General, commanding 1st Division. Headquarters, Steamboat Continental, Pittsburgh, March 18, 1882. Captain Rawlins, Assistant Adjutant General to General Grant. The division surgeon having placed some 100 or more sick on board the Fanny Bullet, I have permitted her to take them to Savannah. There is neither house nor building of any kind that can be used for a hospital here. I hope to receive an order to establish floating hospitals, but in the meantime, by the advice of the surgeon, allow these sick men to leave. Let me hope that it will meet your approbation. The order for debarkation came while General Sherman was absent with 3 brigades, and no man are left to move the effects of these brigades. The landing, too, is small, with scarcely any chance to increase it. Therefore, there is a great accumulation of boats. Colonel MacArthur has arrived, and is now cutting a landing for himself. General Sherman will return this evening. I am obliged to transgress, and write myself in the meantime. Respectfully, your obedient servant, J. H. Hammond, Assistant Adjutant General. P.S. 4 p.m. just back. Had been halfway to Corinth and to Purdy. All right. Have just read this letter, and approve all but floating hospitals. Regimental surgeons can take care of all sick, except chronic cases, which can always be sent down to Paducah. Magnificent plain for camping and drilling, and a military point of great strength. The enemy has felt us twice, at great loss and demoralization. Will report at length this evening. Am now much worn out. Y.T. Sherman, Brigadier General. Headquarters 1st Division. Pittsburgh Landing, March 19, 1862. Captain Rawlins, Assistant Adjutant General to General Grant, Savannah, Tennessee. I have just returned from an extensive reconnaissance toward Corinth and Purdy, and am strongly impressed with the importance of this position, both for its land advantages and its strategic position. The ground itself admits of easy defense by a small command, and yet affords admirable camping ground for 100,000 men. I will as soon as possible make or cause to be made a topographical sketch of the position. The only drawback is that, at this stage of water, the space for landing is contracted too much for the immense fleet now here discharging. I will push the loading and unloading of boats, but suggest that you send at once Captain Dodd, if possible, the best quartermaster you can, that he may control and organize this whole matter. I have a good commissary, and will keep as few provisions afloat as possible. Yours, etc., W.T. Sherman, Brigadier General commanding. Headquarters, Sherman's Division Camp, Shiloh, near Pittsburgh Landing, Tennessee, April 2, 1862. Captain J. A. Rawlins, Assistant Adjutant General to General Grant. In obedience to General Grant's instructions of March 31st, with one section of Captain Munch's Minnesota Battery, 2 12-pound howitzers, a detachment of 5th Ohio Cavalry, of 150 men, under Major Ricker, and 2 battalions of infantry from the 57th and 77th Ohio, under the command of Colonels Hildebrand and Mungden. I marched to the river, and embarked on the steamers, Empress and Tecumseh. The gunboat Cairo did not arrive at Pittsburgh until after midnight, and at 6 p.m., Captain Bryant, commanding the gunboat, notified me that he was ready to proceed up the river. I followed, keeping the transports within about 300 yards of the gunboat. About 1 p.m., the Cairo commenced shelling the battery above the mouth of Indian Creek, but elicited no reply. She proceeded up the river steadily and cautiously, followed close by the Tyler and Lexington, all throwing shells at the points where, on former visits of the gunboats, enemy's batteries were found. In this order all followed, till it was demonstrated that all the enemy's batteries, including that at Chickasaw, were abandoned. I ordered the battalion of infantry under Colonel Hildebrand to disembark at Eastport, and with the other battalion proceeded to Chickasaw and landed. The battery at this point had evidently been abandoned some time, and consisted of the remains of an old Indian mound, partly washed away by the river, which had been fashioned into a 2-gun battery with a small magazine. The ground to its rear had evidently been overflowed during the late freshet, and led to the removal of the guns to Eastport, where the batteries were on high, elevated ground, accessible at all seasons from the country to the rear. Upon personal inspection, I attached little importance to Chickasaw as a military position. The people, who had fled during the approach of the gunboats, returned to the village, and said the place had been occupied by 1 Tennessee regiment and a battery of artillery from Pensacola. After remaining at Chickasaw some hours, all the boats dropped back to Eastport, not more than a mile below, and landed there. Eastport Landing during the late freshet must have been about 12 feet under water. But at the present stage the landing is the best I have seen on the Tennessee River. The levee is clear of trees or snags, and 100 boats could land there without confusion. The soil is of sand and gravel, and very firm. The road back is hard, and at a distance of about 400 yards from the water begin the gravel hills of the country. The infantry scouts sent out by Colonel Hildebrand found the enemy's cavalry mounted, and watching the Inca Road, about 2 miles back of Eastport. The distance to Inca is only 8 miles, and Inca is the nearest point and has the best road by which the Charleston and Memphis Railroad can be reached. I could obtain no certain information as to the strength of the enemy there, but am satisfied that it would have been folly to have attempted it with my command. Our object being to dislodge the enemy from the batteries recently erected near Eastport, and this being attained, I have returned, and report the river to be clear to and beyond Chickasaw. I have the honor to be, your obedient servant, W. T. Sherman, Brigadier General, Commanding Division. Headquarters 5th Division, Camp Shiloh, April 5, 1862. Captain J. A. Rawlins, Assistant Adjutant General, District of Western Tennessee. I have the honor to report that yesterday, about 3 p.m., the lieutenant commanding and 7 men of the advance pickets imprudently advanced from their posts and were captured. I ordered Major Ricker of the 5th Ohio Cavalry to proceed rapidly to the picket station, ascertain the truth, and act according to circumstances. He reached the station, found the pickets had been captured as reported, and that a company of infantry sent by the brigade commander had gone forward in pursuit of some cavalry. He rapidly advanced some 2 miles and found them engaged, charged the enemy, and drove them along the ridge road, till he met and received 3 discharges of artillery, when he very properly wheeled under cover, and returned till he met me. As soon as I heard artillery, I advanced with 2 regiments of infantry, and took position, and remained until the scattered companies of infantry and cavalry had returned. This was after night. I infer that the enemy is in some considerable force at Pea Ridge, that yesterday morning they crossed a brigade of 2 regiments of infantry, 1 regiment of cavalry, and 1 battery of field artillery, to the ridge on which the Corinth Road lies. They halted the infantry and artillery at a point about 5 miles in my front, sent a detachment to the lane of General Meeks, on the north of Owl Creek, and the cavalry down toward our camp. This cavalry captured a part of our advance pickets, and afterward engaged the 2 companies of Colonel Buckland's regiment, as described by him in his report, herewith enclosed. Our cavalry drove them back upon their artillery and infantry, killing many and bringing off 10 prisoners, all of the 1st Alabama Cavalry, whom I send to you. We lost of the pickets 1 first lieutenant and 7 men of the Ohio 70th Infantry, list enclosed, 1 major, 1 lieutenant, and 1 private of the 72nd Ohio, taken prisoners. 8 privates wounded, names in full, embraced in report of Colonel Buckland, enclosed herewith. We took 10 prisoners, and left 2 rebels wounded, and many killed on the field. I have the honor to be, your obedient servant, W. T. Sherman, Brigadier General, Commanding Division. Headquarters 5th Division. Camp Shiloh, April 10, 1862. Captain J. A. Rawlins, Assistant Adjutant General to General Grant. I had the honor to report that, on Friday, the 4th inst., the enemy's cavalry drove in our pickets, posted about 1.5 miles in advance of my center, on the main Corinth Road, capturing 1 first lieutenant and 7 men. That I caused a pursuit by the cavalry of my division, driving them back about 5 miles, and killing many. On Saturday, the enemy's cavalry was again very bold, coming well down to our front, yet I did not believe they designed anything but a strong demonstration. On Sunday morning early, the 6th inst., the enemy drove our advance guard back on the main body, when I ordered under arms all my division, and sent word to General McClernand, asking him to support my left, to General Prentiss, giving him notice that the enemy was in our front in force, and to General Hurlbut, asking him to support General Prentiss. At that time, 7 Ambers. My division was arranged as follows. 1st Brigade, composed of the 6th Iowa, Colonel J. A. McDowell; 40th Illinois, Colonel Hicks; 46th Ohio, Colonel Worthington; and the Morton Battery, Captain Bear on the extreme right, guarding the bridge on the Purdy Road over Owl Creek. 2nd Brigade, composed of the 55th Illinois, Colonel D. Stewart, the 54th Ohio, Colonel T. Kilby Smith, and the 71st Ohio, Colonel Mason, on the extreme left, guarding the ford over Lick Creek. 3rd Brigade, composed of the 77th Ohio, Colonel Hildebrand, the 53rd Ohio, Colonel Appler, and the 57th Ohio, Colonel Mungan, on the left of the Corinth Road, its right resting on Shiloh Meeting House. 4th Brigade, composed of the 72nd Ohio, Colonel Buckland, the 48th Ohio, Colonel Sullivan, and the 70th Ohio, Colonel Cookerill, on the right of the Corinth Road, its left resting on Shiloh Meeting House. 2 batteries of artillery, Taylor's and Waterhouse's, were posted, the former at Shiloh, and the latter on a ridge to the left, with a front fire over open ground between Mungan's and Appler's regiments. The cavalry, 8 companies of the 4th Illinois, under Colonel Dickey, were posted in a large open field to the left and rear of Shiloh Meeting House, which I regarded as the center of my position. Shortly after 7 a.m., with my entire staff, I rode along a portion of our front, and when in the open field before Appler's regiment, the enemy's pickets opened a brisk fire upon my party, killing my orderly Thomas D. Holliday, of Company H, 2nd Illinois Cavalry. The fire came from the bushes which line a small stream that rises in the field in front of Appler's camp, and flows to the north along my whole front. This valley afforded the enemy partial cover, but our men were so posted as to have a good fire at them as they crossed the valley and ascended the rising ground on our side. About 8 a.m., I saw the glistening bayonets of heavy masses of infantry to our left front in the woods, beyond the small stream alluded to, and became satisfied for the first time that the enemy designed a determined attack on our whole camp. All the regiments of my division were then in line of battle at their proper posts. I rode to Colonel Appler and ordered him to hold his ground at all hazards, as he held the left flank of our first line of battle, and I informed him that he had a good battery on his right, and strong support to his rear. General McClernand had promptly and energetically responded to my request, and had sent me 3 regiments which were posted to protect Waterhouse's battery and the left flank of my line. The battle opened by the enemy's battery, and the woods to our front throwing shells into our camp. Taylor's and Waterhouse's batteries promptly responded, and I then observed heavy battalions of infantry passing obliquely to the left, across the open field in Appler's front. Also, other columns advancing directly upon my division. Our infantry and artillery opened along the whole line, and the battle became general. Other heavy masses of the enemy's forces kept passing across the field to our left, and directing their course on General Prentiss. I saw at once that the enemy designed to pass my left flank and fall upon Generals McClernand and Prentiss, whose line of camps was almost parallel with the Tennessee River, and about 2 miles back from it. Very soon the sound of artillery and musketry announced that General Prentiss was engaged, and about 9 amperes, I judged that he was falling back. About this time Appler's regiment broke in disorder, followed by Mungan's regiment, and the enemy pressed forward on Waterhouse's battery, thereby exposed. The 3 Illinois regiments in immediate support of this battery stood for some time, but the enemy's advance was so vigorous, and the fire so severe, that when Colonel Wraith, of the 43rd Illinois, received a severe wound and fell from his horse, his regiment and the others manifested disorder, and the enemy got possession of 3 guns of this Waterhouse's battery. Although our left was thus turned, and the enemy was pressing our whole line, I deemed Shiloh so important that I remained by it and renewed my orders to Colonels McDowell and Buckland to hold their ground, and we did hold these positions until about 10 a.m., when the enemy had got his artillery to the rear of our left flank, and some change became absolutely necessary. 2 regiments of Hildebrand's brigade, Appler's and Mungan's, had already disappeared to the rear, and Hildebrand's own regiment was in disorder. I therefore gave orders for Taylor's battery, still at Shiloh, to fall back as far as the Purdy and Hamburg road, and for McDowell and Buckland to adopt that road as their new line. I rode across the angle and met Bear's battery at the crossroads, and ordered it immediately to come into battery, action right. Captain Bear gave the order, but he was almost immediately shot from his horse, when drivers and gunners fled in disorder, carrying off the caissons, and abandoning 5 out of 6 guns, without firing a shot. The enemy pressed on, gaining this battery, and we were again forced to choose a new line of defense. Hildebrand's brigade had substantially disappeared from the field, though he himself bravely remained. McDowell's and Buckland's brigades maintained their organizations, and were conducted by my aides, so as to join on General McClernand's right, thus abandoning my original camps in line. This was about 1:02 a.m., at which time the enemy had made a furious attack on General McClernand's whole front. He straggled most determinedly, but finding him pressed, I moved McDowell's brigade directly against the left flank of the enemy, forced him back some distance, and then directed the men to avail themselves of every cover trees, fallen timber, and a wooded valley to our right. We held this position for 4 long hours, sometimes gaining, and at others losing ground, General McClernand and myself acting in perfect concert, and struggling to maintain this line. While we were so hard pressed, 2 Iowa regiments approached from the rear, but could not be brought up to the severe fire that was raging in our front. And General Grant, who visited us on that ground, will remember our situation about 3 p.m., but about 4 p.m., it was evident that Hurlbut's line had been driven back to the river, and knowing that General Lew Wallace was coming with reinforcements from Cramp's Landing, General McClernand and I, on consultation, selected a new line of defense, with its right covering a bridge by which General Wallace had to approach. We fell back as well as we could, gathering in addition to our own such scattered forces as we could find, and formed the new line. During this change the enemy's cavalry charged us, but were handsomely repulsed by the 29th Illinois Regiment. The 5th Ohio Battery, which had come up, rendered good service in holding the enemy in check for some time, and Major Taylor also came up with another battery and got into position just in time to get a good flank fire upon the enemy's column, as he pressed on General McClernand's right, checking his advance, when General McClernand's division made a fine charge on the enemy and drove him back into the ravines to our front and right. I had a clear field, about 200 yards wide, in my immediate front, and contented myself with keeping the enemy's infantry at that distance during the rest of the day. In this position we rested for the night. My command had become decidedly of a mixed character. Buckland's brigade was the only one that retained its organization. Colonel Hildebrand was personally there, but his brigade was not. Colonel McDowell had been severely injured by a fall off his horse, and had gone to the river, and the 3 regiments of his brigade were not in line. The 13th Missouri, Colonel Kraus J. Wright, had reported to me on the field, and fought well, retaining its regimental organization, and it formed a part of my line during Sunday night and all Monday. Other fragments of regiments and companies had also fallen into my division, and acted with it during the remainder of the battle. General Grant and Buell visited me in our bivouac that evening, and from them I learned the situation of affairs on other parts of the field. General Wallace arrived from Cramp's Landing shortly after dark, and formed his line to my right rear. It rained hard during the night, but our men were in good spirits, lay on their arms, being satisfied with such bread and meat as could be gathered at the neighboring camps, and determined to redeem on Monday the losses of Sunday. At daylight of Monday, I received General Grant's orders to advance and recapture our original camps. I dispatched several members of my staff to bring up all the men they could find, especially the brigade of Colonel Stewart, which had been separated from the division all the day before. And at the appointed time the division, or rather what remained of it, with the 13th Missouri and other fragments, moved forward and reoccupied the ground on the extreme right of General McClernand's camp, where we attracted the fire of a battery located near Colonel McDowell's former headquarters. Here I remained, patiently waiting for the sound of General Buell's advance upon the main Corinth road. About 10 a.m. the heavy firing in that direction and its steady approach satisfied me, and General Wallace being on our right flank with his well-conducted division, I led the head of my column to General McClernand's right, formed line of battle, facing south, with Buckland's brigade directly across the ridge, and Stewart's brigade on its right in the woods, and thus advanced, steadily and slowly, under a heavy fire of musketry and artillery. Taylor had just got to me from the rear, where he had gone for ammunition, and brought up 3 guns, which I ordered into position, to advance by hand firing. These guns belonged to Company A, Chicago Light Artillery, commanded by Lieutenant P.P. Wood, and did most excellent service. Under cover of their fire, we advanced till we reached the point where the Corinth road crosses the line of McClernand's camp, and here I saw for the first time the well-ordered and compact columns of General Buell's Kentucky forces, whose soldierly movements at once gave confidence to our newer and less disciplined men. Here I saw Willock's regiment advance upon a point of water oaks and thicket, behind which I knew the enemy was in great strength, and enter it in beautiful style. Then arose the severest musketry fire I ever heard, and lasted some 20 minutes, when the splendid regiment had to fall back. This green point of timber is about 500 yards east of Shiloh, Meeting and it was evident here was to be the struggle. The enemy could also be seen forming his lines to the south, General McClernand sending to me for artillery. I detached to him the 3 guns of Wood's battery, with which he speedily drove them back, and seeing some others to the rear, I sent one of my staff to bring them forward, when, by almost providential decree, they proved to be 2 24-pound howitzers belonging to McAllister's battery, and served as well as guns ever could be. This was about 2 p.m. The enemy had 1 battery close by Shiloh, and another near the Hamburg road, both pouring grape and canister upon any column of troops that advanced upon the green point of water oaks. Willock's regiment had been repulsed, but a whole brigade of McCook's division advanced beautifully, deployed, and entered this dreaded wood. I ordered my 2nd Brigade, then commanded by Colonel T. Kilby Smith, Colonel Smart, being wounded to form on its right, and my 4th Brigade, Colonel Buckland, on its right, all to advance abreast with this Kentucky Brigade before mentioned, which I afterward found to be Rousseau's brigade of McCook's division. I gave personal direction to the 24-pounder guns, whose well-directed fire first silenced the enemy's guns to the left, and afterward at the Shiloh Meeting House. Rousseau's brigade moved in splendid order steadily to the front, sweeping everything before it, and at 4 p.m. we stood upon the ground of our original front line, and the enemy was in full retreat. I directed my several brigades to resume at once their original camps. Several times during the battle, cartridges gave out, but General Grant had thoughtfully kept a supply coming from the rear. When I appealed to regiments to stand fast, although out of cartridges, I did so because to retire a regiment for any cause has a bad effect on others. I commend the 40th Illinois and 13th Missouri for thus holding their ground under heavy fire, although their cartridge boxes were empty. I am ordered by General Grant to give personal credit where I think it is due, and censure where I think it merited. I concede that General McCook's splendid division from Kentucky drove back the enemy along the Corinth Road, which was the great center of this field of battle, where Beauregard commanded in person, supported by Bragg's, Polk's, and Breckinridge's divisions. I think Johnston was killed by exposing himself in front of his troops at the time of their attack on Buckland's brigade on Sunday morning, although in this I may be mistaken. My division was made up of regiments perfectly new, nearly all having received their muskets for the first time at Paducah. None of them had ever been under fire or beheld heavy columns of an enemy bearing down on them, as they did on last Sunday. To expect of them the coolness and steadiness of older troops would be wrong. They knew not the value of combination and organization. When individual fears seized them, the first impulse was to get away. My 3rd Brigade did break much too soon, and I am not yet advised where they were during Sunday afternoon and Monday morning. Colonel Hildebrand, its commander, was as cool as any man I ever saw, and no one could have made stronger efforts to hold his men to their places than he did. He kept his own regiment with individual exceptions in hand, and hour after Appler's and Mungen's regiments had left their proper field of action. Colonel Buckland managed his brigade well. I commend him to your notice as a cool, intelligent, and judicious gentleman, needing only confidence and experience to make a good commander. His subordinates, Colonels Sullivan and Cockerell, behaved with great gallantry, the former receiving a severe wound on Sunday, and yet commanding and holding his regiment well in hand all day, and on Monday until his right arm was broken by a shot. Colonel Cockerell held a larger proportion of his men than any colonel in my division, and was with me from first to last. Colonel J. A. McDowell, commanding the 1st Brigade, held his ground on Sunday, till I ordered him to fall back, which he did in line of battle, and when ordered, he conducted the attack on the enemy's left in good style. In falling back to the next position, he was thrown from his horse and injured, and his brigade was not in position on Monday morning. His subordinates, Colonels Hicks and Worthington, displayed great personal courage. Colonel Hicks led his regiment in the attack on Sunday, and received a wound, which it is feared may prove mortal. He is a brave and gallant gentleman, and deserves well of his country. Lieutenant Colonel Walcott, of the Ohio 46, was severely wounded on Sunday, and has been disabled ever since. My 2nd Brigade, Colonel Stewart, was detached nearly 2 miles from my headquarters. He had to fight his own battle on Sunday, against superior numbers, as the enemy interposed between him and General Prentiss early in the day. Colonel Stewart was wounded severely, and yet reported for duty on Monday morning, but was compelled to leave during the day when the command devolved on Colonel T. Kilby Smith, who was always in the thickest of the fight, and led the brigade handsomely. I have not yet received Colonel Stewart's report of the operations of his brigade during the time he was detached, and must therefore forbear to mention names. Lieutenant Colonel Kyle of the 71st was mortally wounded on Sunday, but the regiment itself I did not see, as only a small fragment of it was with the brigade when it joined the division on Monday morning. Great credit is due the fragments of men of the disordered regiments who kept in the advance. I observed and noticed them, but until the brigadiers and colonels make their reports, I cannot venture to name individuals, but will in due season notice all who kept in our front line, as well as those who preferred to keep back near the steamboat landing. I will also send a full list of the killed, wounded, and missing by name, rank, company, and regiment. The enemy captured 7 of our guns on Sunday, but on Monday we recovered 7, not the identical guns we had lost, but enough in number to balance the account. At the time of recovering our camps, our men were so fatigued that we could not follow the retreating masses of the enemy, but on the following day I followed up with Buckland's and Hildebrandt's brigade for 6 miles, the result of which I have already reported. Of my personal staff, I can only speak with praise and thanks. I think they smelled as much gunpowder and heard as many cannonballs and bullets as must satisfy their ambition. Captain Hammond, my chief of staff, though in feeble health, was very active in rallying broken troops, encouraging the steadfast and aiding to form the lines of defense and attack. I recommend him to your notice. Major Sanders' intelligence, quick perception, and rapid execution were of very great value to me, especially in bringing into line the batteries that cooperated so efficiently in our movements. Captains McCoy and Dayton, aides-de-camp, were with me all the time, carrying orders, and acting with coolness, spirit, and courage. To Surgeon Hartshorn and Dr. LeMahieu, hundreds of wounded men are indebted for the kind and excellent treatment received on the field of battle and in the various temporary hospitals created along the line of our operations. They worked day and night, and did not rest till all the wounded of our own troops, as well as of the enemy, were in safe and comfortable shelter. To Major Taylor, Chief of Artillery, I feel under deep obligations for his good sense and judgment in managing the batteries, on which so much depended. I enclose his report, and endorse his recommendations. The cavalry of my command kept to the rear, and took little part in the action, but it would have been madness to have exposed horses to the musketry fire under which we were compelled to remain from Sunday at 8 a.m. till Monday at 4 p.m. Captain Cossack, of the Engineers, was with me all the time, and was of great assistance. I enclose his sketch of the battlefield, which is the best I have seen, and which will enable you to see the various positions occupied by my division, as well as of the others that participated in the battle. I will also send in, during the day, the detailed reports of my brigadiers and colonels, and will endorse them with such remarks as I deem proper. I am, with much respect, your obedient servant, W. T. Sherman, Brigadier General, commanding 5th Division. Headquarters, 5th Division, Tuesday, April 8, 1862. With the cavalry placed at my command, and 2 brigades of my fatigued troops, I went this morning out on the Corinth road. One after another of the abandoned camps of the enemy lined the roads with hospital flags for their protection. And all we found more or less wounded and dead men. At the forks of the road I found the head of General T.J. Wood's division of Buell's army. I ordered cavalry to examine both roads leading toward Corinth, and found the enemy on both. Colonel Dickey, of the 4th Illinois Cavalry, asking for reinforcements, I ordered General Wood to advance the head of his column cautiously on the left-hand road, while I conducted the head of the 3rd Brigade of my division up the right-hand road. About half a mile from the forks was a clear field, through which the road passed, and immediately beyond, a space of some 200 yards of fallen timber, and beyond that an extensive rebel camp. The enemy's cavalry could be seen in this camp. After reconnaissance, I ordered the 2 advance companies of the Ohio 77th, Colonel Hildebrand, to deploy forward as skirmishers, and the regiment itself forward into line with an interval of 100 yards. In this order, we advanced cautiously until the skirmishers were engaged. Taking it for granted, this disposition would clear the camp, I held Colonel Dickey's 4th Illinois Cavalry ready for the charge. The enemy's cavalry came down boldly at a charge, led by General Forrest in person, breaking through our line of skirmishers, when a regiment of infantry, without cause, broke, threw away their muskets, and fled. The ground was admirably adapted for a defense of infantry against cavalry, being miry and covered with fallen timber. As the regiment of infantry broke, Dickey's cavalry began to discharge their carbines and fell into disorder. I instantly sent orders to the rear for the brigade to form line of battle, which was promptly executed. The broken infantry and cavalry rallied on this line, and as the enemy's cavalry came to it, our cavalry in turn charged and drove them from the field. I advanced the entire brigade over the same ground and sent Colonel Dickey's cavalry a mile farther on the road. On examining the ground which had been occupied by the 77th Ohio, we found 15 of our men dead and about 25 wounded. I sent for wagons and had all the wounded carried back to camp, and caused the dead to be buried, also the whole rebel camp to be destroyed. Here we found much ammunition for field pieces, which was destroyed, also 2 caissons and a general hospital, with about 280 Confederate wounded, and about 50 of our own wounded men. Not having the means of bringing them off, Colonel Dickey, by my orders, took a surrender, signed by the medical director Lyle, and by all the attending surgeons, and a pledge to report themselves to you as prisoners of war. Also a pledge that our wounded should be carefully attended to, and surrendered to us tomorrow, as soon as ambulances could go out. I enclose this written document, and request that you cause wagons or ambulances for our wounded to be sent tomorrow, and that wagons be sent to bring in the many tents belonging to us, which are pitched along the road for 4 miles out. I did not destroy them because I knew the enemy could not move them. The roads are very bad, and are strewed with abandoned wagons, ambulances, and lumber boxes. The enemy has succeeded in carrying off the guns, but has crippled his batteries by abandoning the hind lumber boxes of at least 20 caissons. I am satisfied the enemy's infantry and artillery passed Lick Creek this morning, traveling all of last night, and that he left to his rear all his cavalry, which has protected his retreat, but signs of confusion and disorder mark the whole road. The checks sustained by us at the fallen timber delayed our advance, so that night came upon us before the wounded were provided for, and the dead buried, and our troops being fagged out by 3 days' hard fighting, exposure, and privation, I ordered them back to their camps, where they now are. I have the honor to be your obedient servant, W.T. Sherman, Brigadier General, Commanding Division. General Grant did not make an official report of the Battle of Shiloh, but all its incidents and events were covered by the reports of division commanders and subordinates. Probably no single battle of the war gave rise to such wild and damaging reports. It was publicly asserted at the North that our army was taken completely by surprise, that the rebels caught us in our tents, bayoneted the men in their beds, that General Grant was drunk, that Buell's opportune arrival saved the Army of the Tennessee from utter annihilation, etc. These reports were in a measure sustained by the published opinions of Generals Buell, Nelson, and others, who had reached the steamboat landing from the east, just before nightfall of the 6th, when there was a large crowd of frightened, stampeded men, who clamored and declared that our army was all destroyed and beaten. Personally, I saw General Grant, who with his staff visited me about 10 a.m. of the 6th, when we were desperately engaged, but we had checked the headlong assault of our enemy, and then held our ground. This gave him great satisfaction, and he told me that things did not look as well over on the left. He also told me that on his way up from Savannah, that morning he had stopped at Crump's Landing, and had ordered Lew Wallace's division to cross over Snake Creek, so as to come up on my right, telling me to look out for him. He came again just before dark, and described the last assault made by the rebels at the ravine, near the steamboat landing, which he had repelled by a heavy battery collected under Colonel J.D. Webster and other officers, and he was convinced that the battle was over for that day. He ordered me to be ready to assume the offensive in the morning, saying that, as he had observed at Fort Donelson at the crisis of the battle, both sides seemed defeated, and whoever assumed the offensive was sure to win. General Grant also explained to me that General Buell had reached the bank of the Tennessee River opposite Pittsburgh Landing, and was in the act of ferrying his troops across at the time he was speaking to me. About half an hour afterward, General Buell himself rode up to where I was, accompanied by Colonels Fry, Mickler, and others of his staff. I was dismounted at the time, and General Buell made of me a good many significant inquiries about matters and things generally. By the aid of a manuscript map made by myself, I pointed out to him our positions as they had been in the morning, and our then positions. I also explained that my right then covered the bridge over Snake Creek by which we had all day been expecting Lew Wallace, that McClernand was on my left, Hurlbut on his left, and so on. But Buell said he had come up from the landing and had not seen our men, of whose existence in fact he seemed to doubt. I insisted that I had 5,000 good men still left in line, and thought that McClernand had as many more, and that with what was left of Hurlbut's, W.H.L. Wallace's, and Prentice's divisions, we ought to have 18,000 men fit for battle. I reckoned that 10,000 of our men were dead, wounded or prisoners, and that the enemy's loss could not be much less. Buell said that Nelson's, McCook's, and Crittenden's divisions of his army, containing 18,000 men, had arrived and could cross over in the night and be ready for the next day's battle. I argued that with these reinforcements we could sweep the field. Buell seemed to mistrust us, and repeatedly said that he did not like the looks of things, especially about the boat landing, and I really feared he would not cross over his army that night, lest he should become involved in our general disaster. He did not, of course, understand the shape of the ground, and asked me for the use of my map, which I lent him on the promise that he would return it. He handed it to Major Mickler, to have it copied, and the original returned to me, which Mickler did 2 or 3 days after the battle. Buell did cross over that night, and the next day we assumed the offensive and swept the field, thus gaining the battle decisively. Nevertheless, the controversy was started, and kept up, mostly to the personal prejudice of General Grant, who, as usual, maintained an imperturbable silence. After the battle, a constant stream of civilian surgeons and sanitary commission agents, men and women, came up the Tennessee to bring relief to the thousands of maimed and wounded soldiers for whom we had imperfect means of shelter and care. These people caught up the camp stories, which on their return home they retailed through their local papers, usually elevating their own neighbors into heroes, but decrying all others. Among them was Lieutenant Governor Stanton, of Ohio, who published in Bellefontaine, Ohio, a most abusive article about General Grant and his subordinate generals. As General Grant did not and would not take up the cudgels, I did so. My letter in reply to Stanton, dated June 10, 1862, was published in the Cincinnati Commercial soon after its date. To this Lieutenant Governor Stanton replied, and I further rejoined in a letter dated July 12, 1862. These letters are too personal to be revived. By this time, the good people of the North had begun to have their eyes opened, and to give us in the field more faith and support. Stanton was never again elected to any public office, and was commonly spoken of as the late Mr. Stanton. He is now dead, and I doubt not in life he often regretted his mistake in attempting to gain popular fame by abusing the army leaders, that is now an easy and favorite mode of gaining notoriety, if not popularity. Of course, subsequent events gave General Grant, and most of the other actors in that battle, their appropriate place in history, but the danger of sudden popular clamors is well illustrated by this case. The Battle of Shiloh, or Pittsburgh Landing, was one of the most fiercely contested of the war. On the morning of April 6, 1862, the 5 divisions of McClernand, Prentice, Hurlbut, W.H.L. Wallace, and Sherman aggregated about 32,000 men. We had no entrenchments of any sort, on the theory that as soon as Buell arrived, we would march to Corinth to attack the enemy. The rebel army, commanded by General Albert Sidney Johnston, was, according to their own reports and admissions, 45,000 strong, had the momentum of attack, and beyond all question fought skillfully from early morning till about 2 a.m., when their commander-in-chief was killed by a minie-ball in the calf of his leg, which penetrated the boot and severed the main artery. There was then a perceptible lull for a couple of hours, when the attack was renewed, but with much less vehemence, and continued up to dark. Early at night, the division of Lew Wallace arrived from the other side of Snake Creek, not having fired a shot. A very small part of General Buell's army was on our side of the Tennessee River that evening, and their loss was trivial. During that night, the 3 divisions of McCook, Nelson, and Crittenden were ferried across the Tennessee and fought with us the next day, 7th. During that night also, the 2 wooden gunboats Tyler, commanded by Lieutenant Groyne, and Lexington, Lieutenant Shirk, both of the regular Navy, caused shells to be thrown toward that part of the field of battle known to be occupied by the enemy. Beauregard afterward reported his entire loss as 10,699. Our aggregate loss, made up from official statements, shows 1,700 killed, 7,495 wounded, and 3,022 prisoners. Aggregate 12,217, of which 2,167 were in Buell's army, leaving for that of Grant 10,050. This result is a fair measure of the amount of fighting done by each army.